Stop everything you're doing right now because what I'm about to tell you is going to shake the entire foundation of what you thought you knew about Becky Lynch, about women's wrestling, and about how far WWE is willing to go to create drama in 2026. And before you start typing that I'm clickbaiting, that I'm overreacting, that I need to calm down about what happened on Raw this week, let me be absolutely clear with you. When Becky Lynch collapsed on that stage after her confrontation with Maxxine Dupri, that wasn't just another worked injury angle. That wasn't just another scripted moment designed to get people talking on social media. Something went horribly, terrifyingly wrong, and whether it was planned or whether it was a legitimate medical emergency is the question that has the entire wrestling world spiraling into chaos right now. The fact that WWE cut to commercial immediately, the fact that we didn't see Becky again for the rest of the night, the fact that medical personnel were surrounding her while cameras were frantically being waved away, all of that points to something far more serious than your typical wrestling storyline. And if you think I'm being dramatic, if you think I'm reading too much into this, then you clearly haven't been paying attention to the absolutely bizarre and escalating tension between Becky Lynch and Maxxine Dupri over the past several weeks. This isn't just a rivalry. This isn't just two women competing for supremacy in the division. This is personal. This is visceral. This is the kind of heat that makes you genuinely uncomfortable watching it unfold because you can't tell where the performance ends and real emotion begins. And now with Becky Lynch collapsing after their most intense confrontation yet, we're left with more questions than answers and a sick feeling in our stomachs about what we just witnessed. Let me take you back to how this entire situation developed because you need the full context to understand why what happened on Raw this week is so deeply disturbing and controversial. Maxxine Dupri has been undergoing a transformation over the past few months. She went from being the bubbly, energetic manager of Alpha Academy to someone darker, more intense, more focused on proving herself as a legitimate competitor in the women's division. And honestly, a lot of people weren't taking her seriously at first. The internet wrestling community can be brutal, and there were plenty of voices saying Maxxine didn't have what it takes to hang with the top-tier talent, that she was just a manager playing wrestler, that she should stay in her lane. But Maxxine has been working her absolute heart out to prove those critics wrong. She's been putting on increasingly impressive matches. She's been showing a mean streak we never knew existed. She's been evolving right before our eyes into someone who could genuinely become a threat in the women's championship picture. And then she called out Becky Lynch. Not just any call-out. A scathing, brutal, personal promo where Maxxine basically said that Becky is living in the past, trading on her legacy as the man while refusing to acknowledge that a new generation is ready to take over. Maxxine said that Becky's best days are behind her, that she's been coasting on reputation rather than performance, that every time Becky cuts a promo about being the man it rings more hollow because she hasn't been the woman in WWE for years now. It was vicious. It was calculated. And it was exactly the kind of promo designed to get under Becky Lynch's skin because there's probably a tiny part of Becky that worries those things might be true. Becky's response was immediate and equally brutal. She came out the next week and absolutely eviscerated Maxxine on the microphone, reminding her that while Maxxine was learning how to manage wrestlers, Becky was main eventing WrestleMania. While Maxxine was figuring out character work, Becky was revolutionizing what it meant to be a woman in WWE. Becky told Maxxine that wanting to be a top star and actually having what it takes to be a top star are two very different things, and that Maxxine was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The crowd was split on this. Some people thought Becky was putting a young upstart in her place. Others thought Becky came across as a bitter veteran who felt threatened by someone younger and hungrier. Things escalated quickly after that. They had a match, and it was honestly way better than anyone expected. Maxxine held her own against Becky in a way that surprised a lot of people. She didn't win, Becky got the victory with a roll-up after about 12 minutes, but Maxxine came out of that match looking like she belonged in the ring with a former champion. And you could see something in Becky's eyes after that match. Not respect exactly. More like concern. Like she realized Maxxine wasn't just talk. Like she recognized that this woman was actually coming for everything Becky had built. The week after that match is when things started getting weird. Maxxine started showing up during Becky's segments. Not confronting her directly but lurking in the background, watching, studying. Becky would be cutting a promo and the camera would pan over and there's Maxxine on the stage, just staring. No expression. No reaction. Just watching. And it clearly started getting to Becky because her promos became more aggressive, more defensive. She started talking about Maxxine obsessively, started questioning what Maxxine's problem was, started demanding another match to prove once and for all who the better wrestler is. WWE granted that match and scheduled it for 2 weeks ago, but the night before that match was supposed to happen, Maxxine attacked Becky in the parking lot. Cameras caught some of it but not all of it, which made it feel more real, more chaotic. We saw Maxxine jump Becky as she was getting out of her car, saw them brawling between vehicles, saw security trying to separate them. The match got postponed because WWE claimed both women needed medical attention after the parking lot incident, and the conspiracy theories started flying immediately. Some people said it was all a work to build more heat for their eventual match. Others said there was legitimate bad blood between them and WWE was trying to capitalize on it. Nobody knew for sure what was real and what was storyline anymore. That brings us to this week, to Raw, to the segment that has everyone talking and worrying and debating and arguing in equal measure. The show opened with Becky Lynch in the ring demanding that Maxxine come out and face her. Becky looked intense but also tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her movements seemed slightly off, like she wasn't quite herself. The crowd was behind her, chanting her name, but Becky seemed almost irritated by their support. She kept yelling into the microphone that she didn't need their sympathy, she didn't need their concern, she just needed Max and Dupri to get in the ring so they could settle this once and for all. Maxxine's music hit and she walked out onto the stage, but she didn't come down the ramp. She just stood there with a microphone of her own, and the look on her face was something I've never seen from her before. Cold, calculating, almost cruel. She told Becky that she looked tired, that she looked worn down, that she looked like someone who's been carrying the weight of being the man for so long that she's forgotten how to just be Becky Lynch. And there was something about the way Maxxine said it that felt less like a wrestling promo and more like genuine psychological warfare. Like she had identified something true about Becky's mental state and was exploiting it for everyone to see. Becky started walking up the ramp toward Maxxine and you could see her staggering slightly. At first everyone thought it was just Becky selling exhaustion, selling the toll this rivalry has taken on her. But then she stopped about halfway up the ramp and put her hand on her head like she was dizzy. The crowd got quiet. That nervous quiet where everyone senses something isn't right but nobody wants to acknowledge it yet. Maxxine was still on the stage talking, saying something about how Becky couldn't even make it up the ramp to confront her, but her voice was getting distant and distorted like the audio was cutting out. Becky took another few steps and then she went down. Not like a wrestling fall. Not a bump. Her legs just gave out and she crumpled to the stage floor. The look of shock on Maxxine's face seemed genuine. The microphone dropped from her hand and she immediately went to Becky's side. Within seconds medical personnel were flooding the stage. Referees, producers, people in suits we never see on camera. The cameras were trying to cut away but not before we saw Becky convulsing slightly on the ground. Not before we saw the absolute panic on everyone's faces surrounding her. Not before we saw them calling for a stretcher. They cut to commercial and when they came back, there was no mention of what we just saw. No update on Becky's condition. No acknowledgement that anything had happened. The show just continued like normal with a completely different segment. And that's when the internet absolutely exploded. Twitter was in meltdown mode. Reddit was going insane with theories. YouTube channels were going live to discuss what everyone had just witnessed. Because WWE never, and I mean never, just ignores something like that if it's part of the storyline. They milk it. They show replays. They have announcers express concern. They give updates throughout the night. The complete radio silence was terrifying because it suggested this wasn't supposed to happen. The rumors started immediately. Some people claimed they had inside sources saying Becky had been dealing with exhaustion and the collapse was a legitimate medical episode. Others said it was a work but WWE decided to play it completely straight to blur the lines between reality and storyline. There were reports that Becky was taken to a local medical facility. Counter reports that she was fine and backstage the entire time. People claiming they saw her leaving the arena under her own power. Others saying she left in an ambulance. Nobody knew what was true and WWE wasn't saying anything. Max and Dupri posted a cryptic message on social media a few hours after Raw went off the air. Just 3 words. What have I done? That's it. No context. No explanation. Just those 3 words that could mean absolutely anything but felt loaded with implication. Was she taking responsibility for pushing Becky too far? Was she breaking character to express genuine concern? Was it part of the storyline? The ambiguity was maddening and probably intentional. Here's what we know for certain, which honestly isn't much. Becky Lynch collapsed on the Raw stage during a confrontation with Max and Dupri. Medical personnel responded immediately. WWE provided no updates during the show or in the hours immediately following. Becky has not posted anything on social media since it happened. WWE's official channels have been silent about her condition. And everyone is left in this horrible limbo of not knowing if we just witnessed a serious medical emergency or the most elaborate work shoot in recent WWE history. If this is a work, if this is all part of a storyline, then WWE is playing with fire in a way they haven't since the Attitude Era. Because making people genuinely fear for a wrestler's health, making medical emergencies part of your entertainment product, that's a line that probably shouldn't be crossed. Wrestling has always blurred reality and fiction, but there are certain things that should remain off limits, and legitimate health scares should be one of them. If this is storyline, it's irresponsible and exploitative and sets a dangerous precedent for what WWE considers acceptable content. But if this is real, if Becky Lynch legitimately collapsed due to exhaustion or illness or some other medical issue, then we need to have a serious conversation about the schedule WWE puts their performers through. Becky has been working non-stop since her return. She's been on Raw every week. She's been doing house shows. She's been doing media appearances. She's been maintaining her social media presence. She's been a mother trying to balance family life with a brutal travel schedule. And if all of that caught up with her, if her body finally said enough is enough, that's on WWE for not protecting their talent better, for not recognizing when someone is being pushed too hard, for prioritizing content creation over human well-being. The thing that makes this so complicated is that Becky Lynch would absolutely be the type to push herself past her limits. She's talked openly about her drive, her need to prove herself, her fear of being forgotten or replaced. If she was feeling unwell, if she was exhausted, if warning signs were there, Becky probably ignored them because that's who she is as a performer. She's not going to ask for time off. She's not going to admit weakness. She's going to keep going until her body forces her to stop. And maybe that's what we witnessed. Maybe that was Becky's body finally overriding her will and shutting down whether she wanted it to or not. The relationship between Becky and Maxxine adds another layer of complexity to this situation. If you watch their interactions closely over the past few weeks, there's been something increasingly uncomfortable about them. The usual wrestling rivalry beats are all there, but underneath it feels like something more is happening. Maxxine's psychological approach to targeting Becky, constantly bringing up themes of legacy and time and being replaced, feels specifically designed to hit Becky's insecurities. And Becky's responses have felt increasingly desperate, increasingly defensive, increasingly like someone who's not okay but is trying very hard to pretend they are. What role did Maxxine play and what happened? Not literally, I don't think anyone is suggesting Maxxine physically harmed Becky. But did the psychological warfare contribute to whatever caused that collapse? Did the stress of this rivalry, combined with everything else Becky has going on, push her past a breaking point? And if so, how much responsibility does Maxxine bear for that? How much responsibility does WWE bear for encouraging and promoting that kind of intensely personal rivalry? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they need to be asked. The women's division in WWE has never been more competitive or more talented, but with that has come increased pressure on everyone to constantly deliver, to constantly be at their best, to constantly justify their position on the card. Becky Lynch revolutionized women's wrestling in WWE. She kicked down doors and changed what was possible. But maybe the cost of being a trailblazer is that you can never let yourself rest. You can never admit you're tired because there's always someone younger and hungrier ready to take your spot. Maybe that pressure, the constant need to prove yourself over and over again, is what we saw catch up with Becky on that stage. Social media has been absolutely brutal in the aftermath of this incident. Some people are showing genuine concern for Becky's well-being. Others are already fantasy booking what happens next if this is a storyline. There are people blaming Maxxine, people defending Maxxine, people blaming WWE, people praising WWE for pushing boundaries. Everyone has an opinion, and most of those opinions are being expressed with zero actual information about what really happened. It's exhausting and frustrating and emblematic of how wrestling fandom has evolved into this thing where we can't just watch and enjoy anymore. We have to analyze and theorize and argue about every single moment. What happens next depends entirely on what actually happened. If Becky is legitimately dealing with a health issue, then she needs time off to recover, and WWE needs to let her take that time without pressuring her to come back before she's ready. The show will go on without her. It always does. But Becky's long-term health is more important than any storyline or any ratings or any momentum. If this is a work, then presumably we'll get some kind of update soon that advances the storyline with Maxxine. Maybe Becky comes back even more intense and dangerous. Maybe she blames Maxxine for pushing her too far. Maybe this becomes a blood feud that culminates in some kind of brutal stipulation match. Personally, and this is just my opinion, I think there's probably truth somewhere in the middle. I think Becky was legitimately not feeling well, whether from exhaustion or illness or something else. I think WWE and Becky decided to incorporate that into the storyline with Maxxine rather than pulling her from the show. I think what we saw was a real medical situation being used as a storyline moment, which is probably the worst possible option because it exploits genuine health issues for entertainment while also making it impossible to know when wrestlers are actually in trouble versus when they're performing. The lack of communication from WWE is the most frustrating aspect of this entire situation. A simple statement confirming Becky is okay would go a long way toward easing concerns. The continued silence just feeds speculation and conspiracy theories and makes everything worse. Either they're intentionally keeping people in the dark as part of the storyline, which feels manipulative, or they genuinely don't know how to address what happened, which feels incompetent. Neither option reflects well on the company. Maxxine Dupri finds herself in an incredibly difficult position regardless of what the truth is. If this was real and not scripted, she's probably dealing with guilt even though it's not her fault. If it was scripted, she has to live with being the person associated with a controversial angle that a lot of fans are already criticizing. Either way, her name is now linked to this incident and that's going to follow her for a while. It could make her a more significant character if WWE leans into it, or it could taint her with negative associations that are hard to shake. Time will tell. The broader question this raises is about the culture in WWE and professional wrestling generally around working hurt, around pushing through pain, around never showing weakness. That culture has been responsible for some incredible performances and legendary moments. It's also been responsible for shortened careers, permanent injuries, and in some tragic cases, early deaths. If Becky Lynch collapsing on stage makes WWE reevaluate how hard they push their talent, makes performers feel more comfortable asking for time off when they need it, makes the company prioritize long-term health over short-term content, then maybe something good can come from this scary moment. But I'm not holding my breath. WWE has a long history of using real-life situations for storylines. They've turned injuries into angles. They've incorporated real personal issues into character work. They've blurred the lines between reality and fiction for decades because it creates compelling television. And it does. Compelling, uncomfortable, sometimes exploitative television that makes us question what we're watching and why we're watching it and whether we should feel guilty for being entertained by it. What I keep coming back to is the image of Becky Lynch crumpling to that stage floor and the look of genuine shock and fear on Maxxine Dupri's face. Whatever else was happening in that moment, those reactions felt real. The panic from the medical personnel felt real. The chaos and confusion felt real. And if WWE manufactured all of that, if they scripted genuine-looking medical emergency for entertainment purposes, that's gross. If it was real and they're now trying to figure out how to incorporate it into storyline, that's also gross. There's no version of this that doesn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. The wrestling community is divided on how to react. Some people are angry at WWE for potentially exploiting a real medical situation. Some people are impressed by what they see as next-level storytelling. Some people just want confirmation that Becky is okay and everything else is secondary. All of these reactions are valid. This is complicated and messy and there aren't easy answers about what's appropriate and what crosses lines. What I do know is that Becky Lynch collapsing during her confrontation with Maxxine Dupri is going to be one of the most talked about moments of the year in WWE. For better or worse, this is the kind of moment that people remember. That gets referenced years later. That becomes part of wrestling lore. Whether it should become part of wrestling lore, whether it deserves to be celebrated or criticized, those are different questions that each person has to answer for themselves. I genuinely hope Becky is okay. I hope this was just a scary moment that looks worse than it actually was. I hope she's home resting and recovering and will be back when she's ready. I hope WWE learns something from this about protecting their performers and being transparent with fans. I hope Maxxine Dupri isn't unfairly blamed or burdened by something that wasn't her fault. I hope the women's division continues to thrive and deliver incredible moments that don't involve legitimate health scares. But mostly I hope we get answers soon because this uncertainty is brutal. Not knowing if we should be worried or if we're being worked, not knowing if this was entertainment or emergency, not knowing anything except that we saw something deeply unsettling and now we're all left to process it without any guidance or context from the people who could provide that context. It's frustrating and it's concerning and it's exactly the kind of situation that makes loving wrestling so complicated sometimes. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think this was real or worked. Tell me how you think WWE should handle this moving forward. Tell me if you think this crossed a line or if I'm overreacting. And hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep covering this story as it develops and as we hopefully get more information about what actually happened to Becky Lynch on that Raw stage.